You know, I want to share another thing with you from cracking the code. I find this stuff so cool, and then after the break at the bottom of the hour, I will pick up your phone calls. I promise. But I love this stuff, and I think that it's important for people to know. And I wrote this book on basically on NLP, neuro linguistic programming. Only I put it in the context of politics. It's called "Cracking the Code: How to Win Hearts, Change Minds, and Restore America's Original Vision." And I'm going back to this, and I'm going back to some of my other books throughout the summer. I've written almost all these books on the air or in collaboration with y'all, and I do it because I want this information to get out. I believe it's important, and it's been a long time since we talked about this. So, one of the most effective ways to talk to or communicate with another person is to do so using the language or the system in which they perceive the world, the way that they understand the world. How does your friend, partner, companion, husband, wife, whatever, child, how do they understand the world? And here's the deal that most people don't realize and never even think about. We all, in very subtle ways, perceive the world differently, but in gross ways, in larger ways, there are some primary categories. About 60–70% of Americans perceive the world primarily visually. They see things. This is the principal way that they know things, and it's the principal way that they remember things. They create visual pictures. They live in a world of color and light and shapes. And you can identify these people by the way they talk. When they're hanging up the phone, they can't even see you. They say, "I'll see you later." Or when they're trying to make sure that you understand what they're saying, they'll say, "Do you see what I mean?" Because they see it. They're visualizing it. So that's the majority of Americans. A significant minority of Americans, around 20–30%, are primarily auditory. That's me, by the way. I'm in that category. My wife, Louise, she's highly visual. Now, these are not exclusive categories. Louise's primary is visual. Her secondary is auditory. Her third is kinesthetic. My primary is auditory. My second is kinesthetic. My third is visual. I mean, we all have, other ways. We've got a multiple of ways to experience the world. But auditory people experience the world as sound. They can understand 100 subtle gradations in how something sounds, whereas a visual person wouldn't even notice it. What, he's pausing between his words? There's a change in his tone of voice? Visual person literally would not notice it. But if I'm waving my hand around, they would notice that. Visual people look at people's expressions. Auditory people listen to the tonality of their voice. Auditory people represent roughly 20, maybe 30% of the population, and you can tell them, again, by how they talk. They say, "Hey, that sounds great. I hear what you're saying. I'll talk to you later." Right? These are expressions that give away that the person you're talking to is a principally auditory person, or at least in that moment is hanging out in an auditory space. And then there's a very small minority of people, maybe 5%, 10% of Americans, who are principally kinesthetic. And which means kinesthesia is the afferent or the feeling nerves, feeling, sense, touch, right? And the principally kinesthetic people, they feel the world. And this minority that is kinesthetic has a really difficult time in our schools because our schools teach visually and auditorily. Look at this stuff I wrote on the board. Listen to me talking about it. Whereas kinesthetic learners have to do things in order to know them. One of my kids is kinesthetic and had a hell of a time in school until we all figured it out and found a school that was that taught kinesthetically. Kinesthetic people give away their kinesthesia by saying, "Boy, I can get my arms around that idea. Hey, great to be in touch. I'll catch you later." And things like that. So when you hear it, so here's how it gets important with regard to communication. If you're talking to somebody and they're saying, "I see what you're saying. Yep, that's clear to me. Yep. Oh yeah, that's crystal clear. Oh, sure. I see that just as clear as day." Then if you say to them, "Well, here's how I hear it," or here's how I feel about it, they are not going to understand what you're saying. So if you want them to understand your communication, use their language. If you're not a visual person, if you're an auditory person and your impulse is to say, great to hear your voice, you want to say, great to see you. If your impulse is to say, yes, I hear what you're saying, I've heard that before, that sounds good to me, instead say, yeah, I see what you're saying. It's funny, Louise and I have these conversations, and she'll say, this has literally happened. In fact, it happened just a couple weeks ago. We were walking down Main Street. We were walking from the store home, and she was trying to explain something to me, and she said, do you see what I'm saying? And I said, I heard every word. And, me being auditory. And she says, no, seriously. She thought I was making fun of her. She said, seriously, do you see what I'm saying? And I said, well, I can't visualize it. I don't see what you're saying, but I did hear everything you said, and I think I understand it. And she said, you don't see what I'm saying? And at that point, I got it, that I'm being really obstinate and stupid here. And I said, yes, Louise, I see what you're saying perfectly. And she was like, oh, good. Do you get this? Now, if you're communicating with more than one person, and I try to do this a lot in both my writing and on radio and TV, is you say, I want you to see what I'm saying, hear what I'm saying, and get a good, solid feeling for this issue. In other words, you throw out all three, and that way people, each one of the categories, people go, oh, me? So here's a little test. This is on page 42 of Cracking the Code. I naturally and easily say things like, I see what you mean, that sounds sensible to me, or I have a good feeling about that. You can tell. These are, trying to elicit what a person is. When you encounter an old friend, you say, it's great to see you again, great to hear your voice again. I've missed you. You give them a big hug. People say, I have a good eye for decor and color coordination. I have the ability to arrange a stereo and speakers so the music is great. I have a special feeling for my favorite rooms. Get it?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.